Greetings, everyone. Welcome to Quantum Nerds Freedom International live stream. Today, May 28th, we welcome everyone, especially our guest, Patrik Baab. He is a well-known, famous independent journalist from Germany. And at the same time, he is a best-selling author as well. As far as I know, he has these two books on both sides of the front line and also the propaganda press, which were both best-selling. And if you want to follow him, and I suggest truly to follow him, make sure that you can get in touch with Patrik Baab in Substack, in YouTube, and also in his website, Patrik Baab. So I think there, you know how you can translate when you know how to click something somewhere in the Google search, you could translate his German version website to English. And so Patrik, what's the English name for your YouTube? I think it's Against the Stream. Anyway, say something.
Exactly. Hello, Grace. Great to see you again. And so my channel has the name in German, Gegen den Strom, and that means in English, against the stream, because only dead fishes are swimming with the stream.
Oh, that's a good one. I like that. Yeah. So, and remember to all our followers and viewers, please remember to like, give a thumbs up, and subscribe, and always share. Okay, because that's the main thing that we do, and I do, is that for every little podcast or episode, it's always good to share it to other people, and sooner or later there'll be more of us who will really be seeking information, not from the legacy media, not from the mainstream, which is really going to be not the mainstream, and maybe right now is no longer the mainstream, but that's just the term we use. And I still appreciate the term that I think Joaquin Flores from Telegram, who says that's the enemy of the people's media. So that's the term. So Patrik and Monty, welcome. Monty is a citizen journalist, and he's active on Facebook and other social media, and he's really been a friend. And he's American living in another country, but his heart is still with the Americans and what America is going through right now. And sooner or later, there'll be other people who usually joins us who will share their different views, but Patrik Baab will lead our conversation. So right now, we most of us know, if we follow what's going on in the world, that Europe and the whole part of that world is going through some kind of identity crisis and some kind of economic instability, and of course a lot of censorship debates and many stories that you know of, and that hope that people was hoping that the Ukraine war will end shortly is never really doesn't really end. So Patrik, what's going on with this, in that part of the world? First of all, well, how's Germany? You know how people always think, like, how did Germans not able to see what was going on before, way years ago, with what happened to them, and now it seems like, okay, they're again doing the same thing. So here it is. I give you the platform to lead this conversation.
Thank you very much, Grace. So I'd like to say firstly that in Europe, we are as close to a nuclear war as we never was. And the politicians in Germany, but also the majority of the German people, are living in a state of apocalyptic blindness. This is part of the identity crisis of Europe. And well, an identity crisis is, I Googled that, a profound shift in one's goals, values, and self-image. And the symptoms are a disorientation, alienation, and rapid social and economic changes. And this is what we are observing today in Europe. So, war, Ukraine war, and the European identity are intensely linked today. The war in Ukraine has become a new primordial catastrophe for Europe. And Europe is currently undergoing a process of civilizational regression and economic decline. And it is on its path to political suicide. A transnational bureaucracy and a political case lacking democratic uh, legitimacy is attempting to dismantle democracy and drive Europe into a new war with Russia. In doing so, the European Union is acting today as a cash raising machine for NATO, nothing else. And behind NATO, however, stands the United States, stands Washington. It was founded, as the first NATO Secretary General said, Lord Ismay, to keep the Americans in, the Russians out, and to keep the Germans down. And that's the reality today as well. The psychological state of the European elites, from my point of view, and also of the majority of the population, can be described as an apocalyptic blindness and a narcissistic delusion. They do not know what war means. I know I was on the ground in 3 wars. And so these elites in Germany and in Brussels are irresponsible and in a state of moral hazard. They behave in such a way that they can maintain their positions within the government and within the power apparatus and continue to rise. They are no longer political representatives of the people, but of the international financial industry. And for a nuclear power like Russia, when it comes under pressure, will resort to the nuclear option in an attempt to forge a new identity through war in Ukraine and to rein in the centrifugal forces within the EU. These political elites are leading Europe to the brink of ruin. Well, sometimes I remember a sentence, a word of William Shakespeare's The Tragedy of King Lear. "'Tis the time's plague when madmen lead the blind." And I could examine that from a historical and a systematic perspective, but possibly it would be too long.
So, thank you, Patrick. So, I remember you have a very good definition of who the elites are, because many times people think the elites are very intelligent, and that's why they're called elites. So, you want to expand on that word elite, and then let me follow it up with this question of, so what does United States or the Washington's strategic interests have anything to do with the change of that, with the confusing identity crisis going on?
Well, you have to read the papers of Rand Corporation of 2019. And they wrote a paper on extending Russia. And there you can learn that the goal of the United States is to maintain energy dominance over Europe. And the only way to dominate Europe is to bring especially Germany into a war against Russia on the ground of Ukraine. And that's exactly what happened. And with the blowing up of the Nord Stream pipeline, Western Europe and Germany is completely dependent of energy deliveries and energy shippings of the United States. So the goal was reached. The vessels are under control. And that's the result of this policy. And it's a long-term policy grounded in, rooted in Halford Mackinder's theory of Eurasia and the theory of the great Eurasian space. And the deeper sense of this theory is the maritime powers have to split up every big massing of Eurasian powers and have to split up the Eurasian landmass. And this was the reason for founding NATO. This is the reason for Germany's dividing in two parts, and this is the reason for NATO's eastward expansion. It is a confrontation against Russia, and it is a way to stop the Russian-German energy partnership that made German industry very profitable and to a really hard competitor on the world market. And everything is destroyed right now, and it is destroyed by the European kakistocracy. So the ruling politicians are the silliest you can get. And so, well, our Chancellor Friedrich Merz started 30 years ago a campaign. Your tax declaration should be should have the size of a beer deckel. What is the beer deckel? I don't know the English word. Something to put on the desk in the bar, and it's just like that, not more. And I think Friedrich Merz's geopolitical strategic thinking is just of this size, not more.
I think we call it forgive my tardiness, by the way. I apologize. My name is Nick. Very nice to meet you.
Hello, Nick.
Are you talking about the small sample of beer they put in a flight?
Exactly, yes.
Okay. Oh boy. So I was really looking forward to this conversation. So what I've gathered in the time I've been here is that you're saying energy dominance over Europe is the goal. And the way to make this happen is by bringing Europe into a war with Russia via Ukraine. And I guess the question I would have so far is, are you seeing this as an American plan, a British plan, or just a plan that may not be linked to any particular nation?
So, from my point of view, it was in the older days, before the First World War, and in the time after the First World War, a British plan. But this British plan became an American plan. And this plan raised in the years after the Second World War and is written down in the papers of the Rand Corporation. You can read that. It's in public. Everybody can know that. And you can see and read and hear similar declarations of US American congressmen. And this way of thinking raised again with the decline of the Soviet Union and the so-called Wolfowitz Doctrine in 1990 and 1992. Wolfowitz wrote, "America has to stop every power who could be a danger for American world dominance." And that's the strategy. And the strategy is firstly to control the energy of the vessels. And this is exactly what's going on in the Iran War. So the second blocking circle on the sea means no ship can pass to Asia, because Asia is very strongly linked to the energy resources of the Gulf states. And now the Americans try to export and to ship liquid natural gas to Asia in a huge amount. And this is firstly a geostrategic question. It's a part of the confrontation with China. And the second point is it's a way to make money. So what we see right now is the dominance of the financial industry over the production sector. And the financial industry is invested in all these energy companies, Shell, and name it. So, but the financial market is completely free and unregulated because it is not the banking market. It is the biggest market is the market in the shadow banking system. And in this market, the financial investors like BlackRock, State Street are underway, and they are financing states, they are financing wars, and they are constructing and producing bets, structured papers, and so they are boosting the speculation with these papers. And that means they made deals with Ukraine minerals as collateral, but these minerals are today blocked by the Russian army because the Russian army occupied this country partly. And the greatest part of the Ukrainian minerals of all kinds, about 90%, are today in the Russian sector. So there is no collateral, and now they need new collateral for the old deals on the stock market. And if they don't get new collateral, the whole financial system will break down. This is something on the Russian side. Andrei Forsov wrote, this philosopher of history. And so a way to find new collateral and to boost the profits is new gas and oil resources, new profits for the energy industry in the United States, but also starting new wars, because a war is, people doesn't matter. The dead bodies doesn't matter. It's the only question of war is how to make money and to transfer money from the taxpayers' pockets to the financial industry. And this is what we see right now in Ukraine and also in the Middle East.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And there's a lot there. What I find interesting, when I first came in, I was thinking that perhaps this was being aimed at America as far as who the strategy belongs to or came from. But clearly, you're seeing it how I see it. I think Winston Churchill himself openly said, as far as Germany is concerned, is to keep the Russians out, the Americans in, and the Germans down. I think those were more or less the words he used. And I think the politicians in the US, going back through the who knows how far, 80s, 90s, who could be much farther back than that, are very controlled by what happens in many places around the world. I think a prominent one would be the City of London Corporation. That might be a place to look.
Yes,
so,
absolutely.
you know, this seems to be, you mentioned it as the elites, and I think that's a good label for it. And I think a lot of people are looking for one shadowy group in one place, and I think that's a mistake. But there does seem to be a lot of activity in that square mile in London, doesn't there?
Yes. Yes. So Maggie Thatcher destroyed the industry in Great Britain, and the alternative was the financial industry. And we have to keep in mind that the financial district of London is an extra legal zone. They are making their laws by themselves. And well, they are paying political parties and paying politicians. And the bank, the banks, the lenders are voters, and the number of their votes depends on the number of the employees. So, so it's completely crazy. And this financial market is completely open. And it is a money laundering machine named London, nothing else. Because Eastern Europe oligarchs brought their money to London. And via London, the money was transferred to tax havens all over the world. And that's the way London worked. In the 0 years, in the millennium years, I worked in London, and I was in a guest house with the name Chelsea Cloisters in Sloane Avenue in Chelsea. And I wondered about the young girls over there from Ukraine. So they were sex workers. And late at night, they entered the sports cars of different bankers to make their money. And so, well, first, the Ukrainian people was stolen by their oligarchs. Their oligarchs brought the money to London, and then people followed the way of the money to make a living. It's completely crazy. That's what I saw over there. And it is more than 20 years ago. And this is part of the beginning of this great confrontation in Ukraine. It is the strategy of the European Union to bring those countries into the circle of their capitalistic dynamics by cooperation with billionaires and oligarchs, by providing the possibility to make their money disappear, the stolen money. And the people in Ukraine became poorer and poorer in the last 25 years.
It is quite a shame. Identifying the problem is always very important. Now, do we have any idea as to solutions to allow Europe to be Europe rather than a vassal of somewhere else?
Everything depends on the power of the people. So what we need is a public movement against war and against this way of making money. But I have to say, the majority of German people are sleeping into the abyss. There is no protest in the streets against the warmongers. When we start a demonstration right here in Berlin, you can reach 15,000 or 20,000 people. 20,000 demonstrators in a country of 85 million people. That's not enough. They are laughing on us. That's the point. And I have a lot of followers in my YouTube channel against the stream, but it is, well, to agree to an opinion and to get up with one's ass and to act, these are different things. And people are full of fear because the labor conditions today are very difficult. They are freelancers. They have timely limited contracts. They have project contracts of all kinds. So, and they know they can kicked out anytime. And at the same time, I'm an old man. I'm retired. I can say everything. But the younger ones, between 20 and 40. They have their families. They bought a new car. They are searching a larger apartment, which is very expensive. The first child is underway. So they have to solve so many problems. And so the conclusion of those people is often keep your mouth shut. That's the point. And well, so some of my friends said recently, the pressure on those people is not hard enough. But I don't think so. If you come under pressure, you will be focused on survival and on nothing else. So they will be their perspective will get more and more limited, and so I have not so much hope. But on the other hand, as Grace correctly, as I think, said, the mainstream media are not mainstream anymore. They are shrinking, and the alternative and peace-oriented media in the United States, in Europe, and in Germany are growing. That's a small strip of hope.
Yes,
So
Patrick,
raising awareness. Oh, go ahead, Monty.
yes, Patrick, I was impressed with your when you referred to King Lear and the illusion of madmen leading the blind, and the most recent NATO document I just looked at talked about they're focusing on not just information warfare, but cognitive warfare.
Yes.
In other words, the means by which you can take a population and induce fear, anger, hopelessness, and despair. And it's very clear to me that as far as Ukraine and West Asia is concerned, the collective West has actually lost the war. It's much like Stalingrad, right? The war was Nazis were defeated at Stalingrad, but it went on for a few years after that just because they won't give up. And these people, the neocons, the warmongers we're facing, it's the same situation. Given they lost it politically, in other words, most of the world is against this now and recognizing what's been pulled on them in Ukraine and Gaza and Lebanon and so forth, and the Israelis lost it economically. The world is on a state of catastrophic collapse, which we could be facing something even worse than the Depression. And militarily, they've lost at the collective West. So what they're resorting to is just outright terrorism. And as you say, the threat of nuclear war, they actually think they might be able to win a limited nuclear war. So this cognitive warfare, and just so far as terrifying the populations of the world into, as I said, fear, anger, hopelessness, and despair. It brings about a state of madness, like you said, just the blind, a schizophrenic state where people just roll over and are willing to accept something else, such as a technocracy. In other words, democracy doesn't work anymore. It's hopeless. We can't win these elections. Massey got overthrown by money and shenanigans. So I think they're looking to have people begging for a managerial elite to come in and take control. Just a few of my observations, and in reading some of your writings, I think you think along those same lines. Could you maybe elaborate on that a bit?
Well, I agree. The capitalistic system is an expansive system. Capitalism must expand because the profit rate is falling over the decades, step by step. You can show that by empiric studies in the United States and Germany as well. And so the companies and the financial industry try to stop the decline of the profit rate. So they have to expand. They have to find new markets, new cheap labor forces new cheap minerals and resources for the production and for this and for collateral for their speculations. But after the destruction of the Soviet Union, after the end of the Soviet system, the capitalistic system won and spread its arms over the whole world, though they cannot expand anymore. They have to intensify. So they can invest by attacking people's minds with targeting the wishes and the thinking of people to reduce them in the role of consumers. They can target people's health, for example, by creating viruses and selling them pills and all that crap. And they can attack people by reducing the population, because 2 billion people are easier to control as 8 billion people in the whole world. And the easiest way to make money is to start a war. The goal is not to stop the war. The goal is to make the war ongoing. We need the capitalistic industry, the financial industry needs an endless war. And their representatives in the political sphere, they don't want war. They must want war. There is no alternative. They must want war. Look at Friedrich Merz. He must want war. He's the transmission belt of his former employer, BlackRock. Look into his face. He has no complete moral hazard. What can I say about such a man? So, and on the other side, there is no resistance on the side of the people. I was for many years a member of the German Social Democratic Party. And after the beginning of the Ukraine war, the second part of the Ukraine war, in fact, the war started in the year 2014 with the coup on the Maidan, but it was the Russian invasion and the opening of the second part of this war. I started a discussion with a former social democrat, and he told me, "I'm full of trust in our chancellor." And I answered, "I am not." And that's the difference. And 2/3 of the German population trust the politicians, still trust the politicians. Check the regional elections in the country of Baden-Württemberg. 2/3 of all votes came into the pockets of warmonger parties, the Christian Democrats and the Green Party, which are the strongest warmonger. So people are living in a state of apocalyptic blindness. And I have not really a good idea what to do. On the other hand, I'm getting a lot of feedback for my channel. And I know there is a strong minority who wants to resist, to stand up to the warmongers. But I have no solution at the moment. I have to say, I'm living in Germany and I'm very pessimistic.
I see that the AfD is polling about, I think, a record 30% in Germany right now, and the CDU and the Social Democrats are tanking. Does that any sign of hope for you, given their apparent rise with this? Do you see any optimism in that occurrence?
No, because of this reason. The AfD is a protest party, and you're completely right. 30% of the German voters are, are searching a solution via this party. But there is a split inside the AfD. The AfD has a peace-oriented wing that wants to start a dialogue with Russia to stop the war. And the AfD has at the same time a transatlantic wing who want to subordinate this party under NATO and American interests. And the Heritage Foundation, which is very close to Mr. Trump, is trying to influence the AfD very strongly to bring the whole party on a transatlantic line. And I think these efforts will be successful because in 2.5 years, in 3 years, we will have elections for the German Bundestag, and a very strong AfD will have to make a decision between staying a protest party or entering a coalition. And the only way to enter a coalition is to align with transatlantic elites, because the coalition partner, the Christian Democrats, will receive orders and advice from Washington what's to do. And the people in Washington will say, okay, you have a go, because we succeeded in transforming the AfD in the next transatlantic party. And the Christian Democrats will not receive a go from Washington if the wing of peace and against the warmongers inside AfD will be successful. So that's the problem.
Nikki, share your thoughts, because I know you have to leave at some point.
I do. Hi. Nice to meet you, Patrik. I think you're on a roll with where you were going. I don't have a smart question to ask related to those parties specifically, but it was sort of what was coming up for me when Monty said that the people will be begging for a managerial elite or something like that. And my first thought to that is we already have them. We already have the managerial elites. And in the United States, we have not just an inter-elite conflict, but we had a rotation of elites. And that's what the MAGA coalition was, and continues to evolve, of course, as we move along this journey. So I guess my just thought, maybe not in the form of a question, is just that fortunately or unfortunately, what I guess I've learned is that people movements are connected to elite support. And so what we saw in the United States and why Trump was able to go through the Republican Party, and why he had the working class support, was that coalition because of the inter-elite conflict, the elites side with the people groups in order to leverage them. And so what we're seeing in the United States is the struggle of the Democratic Party elites who have not had a rotation of elites. So they're struggling with messaging and activism. They're trying to do different things that are unsuccessful inevitably. So unfortunately, I think that you do need that sort of oomph, perhaps that rotation. Hopefully the relationships that Trump has cultivated, or the things that has gone on in the United States with all of these different factions, hopefully that will allow opportunities within Germany and Europe to go ahead and have some different choices and have some off ramps. And it sounds like the people are in certain positions. But it was interesting when you said that how labor looks in Germany. versus maybe in the United States. That's the only frame of reference I really have. And so the Democrat Party has always been able to leverage the working class Americans and the labor unions, right? They're in cahoots with the labor unions. So they're actually now at this point working against the people, the working class. And that's how Trump was able to come in and sort of move this along in all the different ways. So again, not so much an overt question. And I guess my last thought was ending with the national security, the document, the NSS document that the Trump administration put out, the national security strategy document. I wasn't sure because you had mentioned the Rand Corporation 2019 document, expending Russia, I think it's called. I was curious if you had looked at the NSS and if there was any insight that you had applicable to your country based on that document.
So many thoughts. So I'm sharing your position. I can see in Germany the same process that you described for the United States. Almost every social institution, a lot of NGOs, government-organized NGOs, the labor unions, and almost every organization is today used as a transmission belt of the government and the NATO. So the working class has no opportunity to organize itself in the traditional organizations. It's impossible. So they have to go out. But this is a difficult process. You need labor unions to make contracts and to get a better working situation. But in the question of peace or war, they are failing completely. And I have no idea how to start a social movement in Germany and Europe against the war. Possibly we have in France or in Greece another situation, but I only can describe the situation in Germany. So it's frustrating. It's just frustrating. And what the new security strategy of the United States means for Europe, firstly, is that Europe is only a small chapter and nothing else. So the focus is not Europe. The focus is on Asia and the Americas. That's a different thing. So, and what I hear from people of Rand, working in Germany partly, they are not interested in the processes of Europe. It doesn't matter. Just doesn't matter. If the Europeans want to go deeper into this war, okay, let's go. The main thing is that they buy the military equipment in the United States. That's all. And so the Trump administration was very successful to Europeanize the Ukraine war. And Washington can wash its hands in fresh water and let the Europeans do the job, the dirty work for America to keep the Russian Federation under pressure from the West side. And so the Americans can focus on the other part, or the other half of the global. We want to involve deeper and deeper our Asian allies to bring them into a proxy war against China. And it's the process I see. And on the other hand, the European elites are completely subordinated under American interests because their own survival depends on the big brother. They have no legitimacy in the people. Well, the ratings for Mr. Merz are between 10 and 20%. It's nothing compared to the ratings of Mr. Putin, between 70 and 80% in the Russian people. Independent sources, not Kremlin sources. And so it is an unlegitimated elite in Europe doing this war thing. But on the other hand, there is no protest under the people. I cannot see that. It's really, it is a frustrating situation.
You know, I'm of the opinion that the path has been so laid that perhaps the only escape that the regular people have from the political hegemony of whoever's running this game, whether it's American or British or old money Europe or who knows who it is, it seems to me that the system must collapse under its own weight before we even have a chance at escaping. And then we have to be careful because that collapse might give this managerial elite a chance to assume more control over the people. So if I were to form a strategy to escape that type of control and perhaps get out from under this managerial elite, I would suggest some kind of plan that is built around such a collapse. I would consider a debt reset. I would consider a U.S. default in debt where the U.S. Bonds are no longer attractive to the rest of the world as the beginning event. That's how I would see it. And that's how I would plan it. If it were me, what do you think, Patrik? Do you think that we have to wait for such a financial calamity? Or do you think that consistent pressure over time might win the people their freedom?
So it's difficult to say. I cannot look into the future. But we can see that the elites are afraid of the people and afraid of a collapse of the whole system. So they want regain control. The neoliberal process is completely out of order. And now they try to regain control in the digital capitalism. And it's easy to do. They can screen everything, and the internet today is completely controlled. They can listen to us. They can screen all my clouds, my communication, and everything. It's only small parts of the web are in privacy and secret. The same situation that we have in Russia as well. So this shows the elites want to take away their masks. The mask of democracy is not necessary anymore. What they want to reach is a new form of dictatorship, complete control, and suppression of the people, by all means. That's the way. Well, today, when you have a political position like me, you do not know if you will be sanctioned tomorrow by the EU. You will be the target of extra legal sanctions, and you have no rights anymore, no bank accounts, no money, nothing. So you have no rights anymore. And that's the EU today. It is an anti-democratic warmonger organization, nothing else. And the transmission belt of NATO. That's the future. And I see some trends. De-democratization, civilizational decline into racism and Russophobia, I see financialization more and more, militarization of the youth. So the Bundeswehr, the German military, used to go into schools and to try to bring young people into the army and all that. And well, I always come back to this point. There is no resistance. And that's the greatest risk. And you cannot change the world without the power of the people. The elites won't do that. The elites want to secure their government and their profits. So I'm not really optimistic. I think we are going into a supranational autocracy or a new kind of dictatorship, but it will be. So this is a difference from my point of view to Professor Forsov's point of view. He says capitalism is over. And I say this is a new form of capitalism and making money, a kind of feudal capitalism or digital capitalism or control capitalism. It's a new stage of capitalism. Yeah.
So, Patrick, it sounds like it's the future of Europe is truly, truly dark, but yet you live there. So I was wondering, really, how do you make it through the day? And you mentioned you're getting old, but of course you do want to get some inspiration for that day-to-day thing, right? Activity. And although we relatively we could say that we cannot see the future, but if there's really no resistance, it's really horrible. So it's like going down the drain. So how about you? It's kind of important. I think I wanted to know how your day-to-day conversation with ordinary people, because if we could not have a resistance in massive, in a big group, but at least everything starts with small conversation, right? And because this, what happened now, we know that it's been decades of propaganda planning, especially with children, right? As we grow older. So I think even if the doom is about to happen, but I still believe that we do things for our children, for the future, for the grandchildren.
Yes, I'm starting my day with sports. I'm an old man. I cannot run so on a longer distance, but I can walk. And my day is tough scheduled with writings and podcasts and lectures. So I try to inform people. And I have some credibility because I know war zones. And I can tell people what that means, what war means. But it's not in the mainstream media. I'm completely cancelled in the mainstream media. I'm just in, the new media, a speaker or an interviewee, and that's my day. And well, we have to try to regain the public space. We lost the public space. We lost the debate space in public. And when I'm traveling through Germany, Austria, Switzerland mostly, many rooms are blocked. I cannot get rooms for rent. It's impossible. But we have to try. And as we did in Weimar, for example, we meet private. So we got back to the situation of the early 19th century when the Democrats gathered in private rooms and made their plans. This is the situation of the times of the Enlightenment as well. So small circles of people met in Königsberg, in Halle, in Berlin, in Paris. But in fact, in the end, they created a worldwide social movement against the kings and queens and aristocrats. And for a long time, they won. But today we are living in a time of regression behind the status of enlightenment into a kind of new dark middle age with political prosecution in a new feudalism, for example. But we have to try. The most important thing is to go on working on democracy and to show democratic fighting spirit. That's the most important thing. And I love confrontations. It is better to come into a fight as no social contact. So, and I love to be in a fight. And up from this position, it is not so hard, Grace.
I know, Nikki, I think you wanted to say something when he said, I love to be in the fight. Oh, you muted me, Nikki.
Yeah, I was just thinking of what Drago and Nick were talking about on the last episode about a fight. You have the skills to fight. You hope you never need them, but I mean, we're talking about a different kind of a fight. So yeah, you got to give it YOLO, right? You only live once, so you got to give it. Can't leave anything on the field, right?
Well, if you're in a fight,
Or, I'm sorry, you leave. I'm sorry, you leave everything on the field.
if you're gonna have a hand-to-hand situation, it must be the only choice. That's what I was taught. You don't fight if you can avoid it. It seems to me that in this situation, the fight is being brought to the people.
Yes.
Yes, Patrick, I'd like to address something you can't speak of in Germany, but I think it's relevant. And aside from the fact I agree with you on there's a grab for collateral, there's a recognition that they have to have collateral to feed this bubble, and you describe it as made by capitalism. I don't necessarily totally agree it's capitalism. It's more predator capitalism, or a usurpation of what really capitalism is, which is the increase in capital through entrepreneurship and development, science and technology. But putting that aside, at a deeper level, I believe there's a fight against an ideology. And Russia, in their special military operation, defined this as one of their objectives was a military defeat of Ukraine, but also the elimination of a Nazi ideology.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Now, most recently, just this past couple of weeks, since the escalation, the more drones being flown, blowing up kids' schools in Luhansk and so forth, it appears that Russia, at least, is speaking the quiet part out loud now, which they were reluctant to state it before, I think, for good reason. But there's an increase now, which is a recognition that the West is directly behind the capabilities of Ukraine in this war. And in relationship to that, I found it very interesting that Putin, in a recent address, along with his foreign minister Lavrov and Mendeleev, they came out explicitly in relationship to this ideology I'm talking about. They came out explicitly and stated that the problem with the ending of World War II is Germany was not denazified. They stated that. And they went on to elaborate that it found its home not only in Germany, but also in NATO. In other words, what I believe he means by that is this referring to Nazification is the same ideology which we found under Hitler and the Nazis, but also with the Zionists. And it really is a supremacist, exceptionalist messianic ideology. And I think the collective West is still lends itself to that kind of, they see themselves as somewhat supremacist, exceptionalist. We're the messiahs, we have the way, and the rest of the world just has to bend to our will. And I think that's where a majority of the people in the collective West are reluctant to come to terms with that. And I found it, that quiet part spoken out loud, I think Russia is very well recognizing that this is also not only got to be defeated in Ukraine, but throughout NATO. I think they're recognizing that NATO is just not going to give up on this. In other words, there's really no negotiating with. How do you negotiate with that? You've got to defeat it somehow. And I think the final outcome is going to be a military defeat in that regard. Your thoughts?
Well, the allies of the anti-Hitler coalition formulated 4 goals in 1945 for Germany. Firstly, denazification. The second point was demilitarization. The third, democratization and decentralization. And this goal was not completely reached because the Nazi elites lived on in a continuity in Western Germany, especially. And the Ukrainian Nazi elites lived on undercover in Canada and at the west coast of the United States. And they could reactivate their potential in 1948, when the just founded CIA started a civil war in Ukraine with those guys. And this civil war lasted until the mid-50s, and it cost the Soviet Union about 10,000 people, 10,000 killed people. And then, so the Americans resigned and stopped this process and told the Ukrainian right-wingers to go undercover. And they lived, especially in Galicia, in the Western Ukraine, undercover in, for example, university institutions, in linguistic, academic parts of the university, institutions, and so on. And then Khrushchev, as a Soviet leader, freed more than 20,000 Ukrainian Nazis and sent them home from the concentration camps. And so the Nazi groups in Ukraine were reinforced, and there is a continuation of these right-wingers during the Soviet Union and the Soviet times. And they lived up after 1990, and they formed new organizations in the tradition of the old organizations. And so to bring Ukraine in the Western circle of economy and the Western circle of geostrategic thinking, there was a collaboration between NATO states, the United States especially, and Great Britain, and Ukrainian Nazis. And this was exactly the coalition that organized the Maidan coup in February 2014. We know there were 8 groups of snipers, 10 soldiers each, 4 groups of snipers from Georgia, 2 groups from Galicia, 1 group of Poland, and 1 group of Lithuania. So let me ask, what is the role of a Lithuanian or Polish sniper on the ground of Ukraine in Kiev? So it was Western organized. Check the studies of Professor Ivan Kachanovsky of the University of Ottawa in Canada. He wrote it down. You can see it for free in the internet. And so the collaboration with Ukrainian Nazis brings NATO states into in a kind of co-transformation. What we see right now is not the Ukraine becoming a full member of the EU, but what we see is the Ukrainization of the European Union. We will see in the European Union more militarism, more warmongering, more corruption, more oligarchs at the cost of the taxpayers and the normal people, the working class. These are phenomena we know from Ukraine. So this is part of the decline of Europe and part of the destruction of the European societies. That's the point I see. And so when Putin invaded Ukraine on February 24, 2022, he proclaimed 3 goals. The first goal was safety for the Russian originated people in eastern Ukraine. This was the first goal, and he reached this goal. The second point was Ukraine must be a neutral state outside NATO. This is an open question right now. And the third point was denazification of Ukraine. And he did not reach this goal. And I think he cannot reach this goal except he will conquer the complete country of Ukraine, including Galicia. And 700,000 men under weapons are not enough for that. And that's the amount of the Russian troops right now. Between 700,000 and 800,000 soldiers on the soil of Ukraine. You need, for example, 2 or 3 million people. It is a difficult and huge country. So you need more men. And so the western part of the Ukraine is traditionally oriented to the West. It was part of the Austrian-Hungarian Empire. It was between the wars, it was part of Poland. After the Peace of Riga in 1920. And so a smart decision would be give Galicia to Poland and take the rest. And after the beginning of the war, Putin said, just in one sentence, if Poland wants to have Galicia, that's not a problem. So in the end of the show, we lost on the Ukrainian side 2 million people, almost about 2 million people. On the Russian side, I think 200,000 to 250,000. And the killing goes on. And in the end of the show, Ukraine will be bloodied out and divided. The question is, where's the frozen front line for the future?
I mean, I would look at it financially as well. As you mentioned earlier, the mineral wealth is pinned down. And I really like that you understand, or at least you see the way that I do, that Ukraine is it's a promise for the future wealth of Europe, meaning that Europe is justifying the printing of their debt based on the future earnings of their holdings in Ukraine. They're collateralizing basically Ukraine to print their debt, because if they lose Ukraine, the world will no longer have confidence in the future of the European debt in a big way. And the fact that the Russians got their forces to cover where the mineral wealth is, that is a very substantial, dense bit of wealth that the Russians have taken, and it's a bite out of that collateralization. I do look at Europe and Russia a little more holistically. Despite the fact that certain powers would have them divided, they actually are very united in business, more so, than people know, less so than maybe 10 years ago. But still, there's a lot of business between the two. And I think if Europe were to completely financially fall, I think that that financial contagion would affect Russia very negatively. So I think Russia is having to strike a balance between perhaps holding back Europe in a certain way. And I say Europe, I should probably include all of the NATO forces, including the United States. I shouldn't simply say Europe. I think Russia has an existential threat they must defend against. And at the same time, if they were to completely destroy or very, very permanently alter the economies of Europe and even the US, it would also be a problem. So it seems to me that perhaps the game they're playing is a middle ground where they can assume control over some of that wealth, and perhaps channel that wealth into a future that is not necessarily affecting Ukraine as negatively as it would otherwise. That's my theory. And it is the predication of that theory is based on the collateralization of Ukraine. And I know you and I agree on at least that concept, but how do you feel about my middle ground theory? Do you think that that has value, or do you think that Russia simply will sweep through and de-Ukrainize Ukraine somehow?
In May, I was in Russia, and I spoke to a lot of people, historians, political scientists, Secret Service officers, all kinds of people. And those people are perfect in English. They partly speak German. They know German and European literature. They partly read my books. I had a discussion in a bar with young people, and they were very well informed about the situation in Germany and about my theories on that. So Russian culture is still part of Europe, yes. But the economic split is very deep. So Russia is defining today as a Eurasian culture of its own, not as a European culture anymore. The political scientist, Professor Sergei Karaganov, who has a lot of influence in Russia, wrote, "The European journey of Russia is over." And what he means is the process that began with the foundation of St. Petersburg in 1703 will come to an end and turned around in a form of pivot to Asia. So the cooperation with China and India is getting deeper and deeper. They are organizing the financiation of a power of Siberia too. It's still an open question, but because this is a process, this project cost billions of money, billions of dollars, and rubles or euros or whatever you want, but it's very expensive. But the gas who should come to Europe will go to China via power of Siberia, pipelines, trains to Asia, and by ships crossing the northern route and the northern route is much shorter than the route around Africa or through the Suez Channel. So it cost not so much money. And this makes Europe to the backyard of history. The politicians didn't oversee the effects of their decisions. And it would be best for Russia to find an economic balance between China and Western Europe. But it is impossible with this generation of European politicians. The first step would be an exchange of European elites. Could you imagine that Mr. Putin will come to the negotiation table with Mr. Merz? It's a joke. It's just a joke. And well, our foreign minister, Johann Wadefuhl, I know him for a very long time, for almost 30 years. He wanted to visit China. And the only one who wanted to receive him was the foreign minister of China. And the Chinese refused to organize further meetings. And translated from diplomatic speech, that means kiss my ass and go home. That's all. And we have no respect in the world. We are just vessels of the United States. Don't talk to the keeper, talk to the bar owner. That's the process. We doesn't play any role. We don't play any role as Europeans and as Germans as well. So it will take a long time. I know that, there are no official diplomatic channels. So sometimes you have problems to solve human problems. You need channels to do that undercover a bit. And there are no channels. I have a channel to Russian people, and they respect me. And, well, Michael von der Schulenburg, the member of the European Parliament of Bündnis Sarah Wagenknecht, has a channel of its own. And then the show is over. So everything is broken, and it will take years to rebuild diplomatic channels between Western Europe, Germany, and Russia. Can you imagine, let me say, Maria Zakharova will negotiate with Kaya Kallas? Just it's a funny movie, not more. Imagine that. And so everything is destroyed, and it will take years over years to rebuild that. And I was in Russia in May, I told you, and Russia today is not Russia in 2021. The country was modernized completely, not only in Moscow, also, for example, in Volgograd and other cities. They invested a lot. Now they are producing trains, goods, and aircrafts on their own. On the other hand, Europe is directly involved in the Ukraine war. Keep in mind this attack of the Ukrainian army against this student dormitory near Lugansk. 21 dead young people, no military facilities all over the map, nothing. But where do the drones come from? They're coming from Europe. They are produced in Europe today. And the Russians found parts of Starlink devices. So Starlink is involved. Elon Musk is involved in this war. The Americans are involved. The Europeans are involved. Ukrainian drones are crossing Poland and the Baltic states to find their goal in the oil port of Ust-Luga. So that means by international law, European countries are involved. And so the head of the European Commission, Ursula von der Leyen, oh, I love them so much, said recently in the Baltic states and the European Union, we will make Russia lose. So this is a sentence spoken by a lady who feels herself involved in a war against Russia. It is impossible that Russian elites will negotiate with those people. I think it will take 100 years because the investments in new pipelines to Asia, in new atomic icebreakers, in a new tank vessel fleets, these are billions. And this investment must bring money first, and it will take years to make these investments profitable. So the Russians want to make their own investments profitable, and the Europeans can stand on the last end of the line. That's the situation. But I have another joke. I think that American companies and Russian companies will soon negotiate about a restart of gas transport via Nord Stream 1. They will reconstruct Nord Stream 1 and deliver amounts of gas to Europe. And they can decide on the price the Europeans have to pay. So it's an energy dependency on its best. It's great. It's fantastic. So the Europeans lost everything because the countries are run by silly people. A kakistocracy.
One thing you said about Starlink parts in the drones. I spoke with a friend of mine who is Ukrainian. He's a scientist, and he said that drones, no matter where they come from, are heavily reliant on Chinese parts as well, Chinese technology and parts. So I'm wondering if just having parts that are American parts or Chinese parts in a weapon system is a justifiable way to say that that country is involved in the war. Because then we could then rationalize that China is involved in that war because their parts are in those drones as well. Now, to counter my own argument here, I would suggest that this justification that the United States is involved more so than, using the Starlink parts might be significant depending on the kind of part that we're talking about.
Yes, absolutely. Okay. This is only one thing, according to Russian sources, I have to say. But Starlink is deeply involved in this war because Starlink is providing the satellite network for Ukrainian military. On the other side, the CEO of Palantir visited Kiev in May this year to discuss more support for Ukrainian military and Ukrainian army. It's another sign. And let me give the complete picture. The Americans are still involved, and they refused to drop down their support of Ukraine, and the Europeans are deeply involved. Well, we are producing long-range missiles with Ukrainian companies to hit, as politicians openly say, to hit Russia deeply inside its country. And so we are on the very brink of a new great European war.
Well, I should hope not, especially for the case of
I hope as
Europe.
well.
I don't know that they're able to produce the kind of weaponry that would be able to have any effect in a sustained war against Russia, whose weaponry is their military and their production of such weapons is some say the best in the world. They say the United States doesn't have the capability to wage a protracted war with Russia, let alone Europe, not at its current production levels, not at the kind of technology that we're making, unless there's some secret hidden technology. And, we can go into such theories. But at least on the surface, I don't think that a great European war will end well for Europe at this point. I don't believe Europe is equipped.
Yes, that's what I'm saying all the time. But according to the official theory, Putin will wait until the year 2029, and then Western Europe will be ready.
And whose theory is that? Because it doesn't sound like Putin's theory.
Yes, that's the silly theory of our military minister. I forgot the name. Pistorius.
Now, do these theorists?
It's completely. It's crazy. I know.
It's crazy. I'm wondering if these theorists have a drug habit, because I don't understand how obviously we know. I don't know if I've said it on this podcast yet. I believe that the remilitarization of Europe is merely an excuse to move money around in Europe, and of course for some of that money to be siphoned off, and perhaps similarly so in the United States or anywhere else that is involved. I don't have confidence that Europe would have the capability to remilitarize, and even if they did, sure, there's heavy industry in Europe. We know. I'm not saying they don't have the technical capability. They could, if they had the 10 years, or if they just all of a sudden really changed everything. It would be a very radical change to remilitarize within 5 years to be able to take on Russia. And of course, Russia would see that happening, and then they would prepare for that. And I think Europe is so far behind militarily that this is just not realistic, even in 10 years. In my opinion, this whole thing is another reason to move money around and steal from the people. This is my theory. Do you see any other? Well, first of all, do you agree with that financial theory? And do you see any other reason?
I completely agree with that. So war in Ukraine is a great money laundering to transfer the money from the pockets of the taxpayers to the financial industry and to the American military industrial complex. And this show works. And this is the reason for this Russophobic propaganda, to make people blind. The elites make the people blind. They shouldn't see where their money goes. That's the first point. But on the other hand, if you want peace, you have to prepare for peace. And the European elites are preparing for war. And that means we came into a circle of escalation. Every step forward by military will be seen on the other side as aggression. And they will escalate on the next level. And this will be seen on the European side as a step of escalation. And then they go on in escalating all these things. And in the end, somebody makes a mistake. And then we have a showdown. That's what we saw several times in the Cold War. It was so close. And what I see, there is no trust. In the Cuban crisis in 1962, the young president, John F. Kennedy, and the old World War II veteran Khrushchev, who was in Stalingrad as well, found a common base of trust. And the result was the Russians took out their nuclear missiles from Cuba, and some months later, in a secret agreement, the Americans took out their missiles from Turkey. So what you need is a minimum in trust. Both sides have to explain their own team on both sides what to do. And today we have no trust anymore. Because
No trust. No, I'm sorry.
That's a big problem, because the Europeans and the Americans choked Putin with the Minsk agreements, and they choked Putin with the negotiations in spring 22, and all these things. And the result is no trust. And
Not agreement capable, they say.
yes. And in the end, you trust in your arms. And that's the point. So I have no hope. We need other elites. We need an exchange of elites in Western Europe. Well, Western Europe, the European Union is run by the silliest guys we could find. And this is one reason I have no hope.
On the other hand, there is really hope. You see, you've been sharing already all these little hopes and the collaboration, the cooperation happening between Russia and China. And, that's why they've been busy visiting China, right? So there is that kind of hope. Patrik, I know you don't have any kind of appointment, you can feel free to stay longer, but you did say, but so if you have words.
For me, it would be helpful to check out, because I have so many things on my to-do list, and have to go into the night with an amount of work.
So do invite everyone to where they can connect with you. And of course, I do thank Nick, and I do thank Monty, and our friend Nikki, who had to leave earlier. But please, Patrik.
Thanks very much, and have a great time. Thank you very much for this conversation.
And follow you in Substack, YouTube, and your website.
That's it. Absolutely. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Patrik. Good day.
Bye.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Take care.